there. This is I'm just doing this for some commentary, I guess, to just put it on the public record. Um, I know I've covered some of this stuff before, but it's worth repeating in the sense that I listen to Tucker Carlson, who's probably one of the more honest mainstream journalists on Fox News, and he had a program last night where he essentially threw the gauntlet down, much in the same way that President Trump did, about um, how this particular election, that the people of America are not accepting the result, and what is that an indicator of? That they don't trust their own government. Okay, and that's pretty obvious. And as I've mentioned before, without doing an historical analysis and knowing, how we got here. And I've said this before, all you got to do is go into the U.S. House of Representatives, look at an aerial view of Washington, D.C. That architecture is all Roman Draco, okay? It's no different than the same Roman Empire they built, which was the first one. And if you know your history of Constantine, who was the emperor, why he moved it to Constantinople in the east, was because he realized that Rome was infested with demons that were engaged in perversion, okay, self-indulgent and perversion, which means that people were basically pathological liars, okay? And nobody trusts anybody anymore, okay? They live in fear of each other. Therefore, if you can't trust somebody, it means that, hey, there's no telling what they're going to do. How can you have a thriving relationship with somebody that you don't trust because you fear that you can't trust them, that they'll do something? Okay, so when you have a society, large population groups of people that, one, don't trust each other, instead they fear each other, instead of loving each other and caring for each other, obviously there's only one result that's going to come as a result of that, which is collapse. Okay, so if you were paying attention on your own timeline 50 years ago, you could use the exponential function and realize that, for example, when I grew up as a child in the 1950s, and this is just true, ask any baby boomer who's 60 or 65 years of age plus, that if you were ever caught lying, okay, amongst your peers, you were outcast. Nobody wanted anything to do with you. You were all on your own. You were basically run out of town on a rail. And I remember my own father, who was born in 1913, would tell me the same thing. Nobody wanted to do business with you if you couldn't be trusted. So if you can't trust somebody, what happens? You're not going to have a mutually beneficial relationship, are you? So what you began to notice over time, from the 1950s forward, because you couldn't help but notice it, is the amount of people that were lying to each other increased. The amount of people that weren't trusting each other anymore increased. The amount of people that were engaging in sexual pornography increased. The amount of perversion increased. So all you had to do was match that up to the Roman Empire, number one, and go, hey, this is just a Xerox copy of the same shit they went through with, that led to the collapse in 408 AD when Rome was sacked. Okay, which basically meant that the country is going to be open to the highest bidder because everybody's selling each other out. Because nobody's living in any more honor. Nobody trusts anything anymore. People are being bribed, blackmail, and all the rest of it. And so when you look at the history of America itself, you can see how this was all going to play out and collapse. And yet you have many patriotic Americans who believe in themselves, who believe that in their own mind and in their own soul, they are capable of self-governing themselves because they've grown up in the world, if you will, okay, where the things that mean the most to them is what it means to have a thriving and mutually beneficial relationship with other people, okay? So if you want to break this down in genetics, as the difference between a reptile and a mammal, if you will, simply examine mammals in the wild and examine reptiles in the wild. And then look at the anatomy and physiology of a human being. And so when you begin to realize the neocortical and the limbic in the fear-based reptilian brain, then all you have to do is translate that through the relationships that you have millions of people in the society. That's why Patty had mentioned most of the people in America that are running the government are hybrids. So their energy, if you will, the expressive energy, the gene in the chromosomes are predatory. They have to, a soul would have to, for those that have a soul, are going to have to struggle, okay, in a body, in the biotechnology that they're in, that is like diametrically opposed to each other because mammals are heart-based. Go examine the great apes in the wild. A female mother gives an enormous amount of love, compassion, and empathy to its newborns. And that's true for bears, okay? So that's not true of reptiles, okay? And so that's one of the reasons why Gaia was sending such a powerful signal out to send the information to essentially repair the hybrids, okay? But that's when they brought out the binary artificial intelligence with all the Wi-Fi and microwave towers to walk all over her signal. Okay, so that plays a significant role in why you have, as I mentioned in a previous video, the difference in the energies, okay, the distortion in the energy field, because you have so many beings, if you will, not just in the United States of America or the West, if you will, but all over the planet, because you have different genetics of beings that are running different frequencies that are all over the place. So when you have as much trauma as occurred on the planet as a result of those relationships between high frequency and low frequency, all the pillage and the plunder and the wars that have gone on, right? It means that there isn't hardly any love being shared between not just families, but families to families in a neighborhood, and then across larger population groups. So you can expect over time there isn't a whole lot of love left or light left in communities, and that's what I measure. So how do we sort that problem out? See? And that's when President Trump said draining the swamp, which is draining the lizards. Demons, okay, because they run a deficit. They run a deficit of electrons because they're always feeding on somebody else's light, which means instead of gaining more light, they're losing more light, okay, which means they live on more of the black hole side of things, which is a deficit of what the light is, so they can't see the road ahead of them. That puts them in a state of fear because they're not running a love frequency. And so when you have beings that you have an interface with that aren't running any love, and you are, then the difference between them and you is going to be the difference in the loss of electrons. Because you will experience a loss in your own energy as a result of what you experience through their energy. And that's why the energy field is distorted. That's a big reason why it is. The other reasons are all the cell phone towers that are up, that are hitting everybody and knocking their energy down. They have a lot of antennas that were up through most of all the cities around the planet that were sending out, beaming out low frequency energies that were deliberately done to not only walk over her signal, but drain people's energy, upon which they were collecting them, okay, which were known as loose pumps, which means they were collecting the lower frequency energies that were being emitted by millions of batteries that were being drained, okay, as a result of that. And then that was filling the ley lines with negative current, which became food for the archons. So this is why I've mentioned many times, electrical wars are energy wars, which are frequency wars and genetic wars. So when you begin to realize, well, this was a genetic experiment here, and you're in basically a big lab, a laboratory, genetic laboratory, because that's what they were running on the planet, is Frankenstein MyLabs, which are military, industrial, off-planet ET genetic laboratories. You know, that's one of the reasons Soros was involved in a lot of that stuff, because he was trying to pawn off for big money, if you will, human DNA, because it has, our DNA is connected to source. So we have a source connection, in which we have a source connection to living light, which is what love is. Okay, which means we have a source to never run out of it. So we'll always have a way to recharge our battery. Okay? So that's the nature of the problem. So this is going to be interesting to see how this plays out, because everybody's still pretty much intact, which means when you go through all the different communities, how do you restore the light in all these people who run lower frequency energy with other beings? Okay? Those that, for example, like myself, I reach a point where I don't want to live or have anything to do with the civilization anymore, because there isn't anywhere that I can go where I'm experiencing the same energy that I'm running. And the only place I know that I can do that is to go back out and live in nature, which means having a total separate relationship between civilization, which is the United States of America, anybody who lives in a community, and then living in nature separated from them. That's how bad it is. Okay? So how is that going to get ironed out? Well, when you realize the timeline that you're on, and you realize that graduation took place in 2013, and you realize that she was already shifting the poles, and when you realize that we had anticipated that a pole shift was going to take place in, when was that? About a year and a half ago, because the South Pole was moving at 46 miles an hour, the North Pole was moving at 57, and you could track the changes, which is why there was a lot of changes taking place in the magnetic field. And that's when I remember that Karen had said that the Arcturians had stabilized the poles. They were rescuing children and putting them in healing biospheres. Okay? So the question thus remains, well, when is that pole shift going to resume again? Okay? So these are some interesting questions of how this is going to go forward, and obviously it is really ground zero for why you have a lot of light workers who have channels, okay, that are trying to, if you will, emphasize the importance of getting your energy up, because when you have your energy up into fifth density consciousness, which means you're able to run a high speed vibration, then that will shift enough units of consciousness to which the previous world that was lower frequency, it's called in alignment with a higher bandwidth perception, that the bands of the waves that we are all experiencing is shifting ourselves together. So that means there has to be enough psychic energy of those that are running a higher vibrational speed, okay, which means you have to reach what is called critical mass. Okay, there has to be enough psychic energy or enough batteries, enough beings that are vibrating at a higher rate of speed together. There has to be enough of that energy that's being experienced together on a higher speed to shift us together. Okay? Those that can't do that because they're holding on to either too much trauma, or they're androids and they're cyborgs, or they're ETs wearing skin suits where they don't run that energy to begin with, they will simply disappear. Their timeline, their lower energetic units of consciousness will simply collapse, because the vast majority of the psychic energy that is represented by more units of consciousness will be shifting together into 5D, because it's already there. That world is already there to move into. Okay? So this is why this particular period of time and going forward between now and the future is the most critical time in which to raise your state of vibration, because obviously that world ended. The one that we came out of, which is represented by a distorted energy field, does not have a future. There is no future on that timeline. It's going bye-bye. Okay? And that's why I even bothered to even put any of this stuff up here. It's because I know these things. It's actually common sense or basic logic that you have units of consciousness on this planet that do not run a lower frequency vibration, and you have other units of consciousness that run a 528, which is what love is. When you realize and know that that's what the law is here, the reason why it is the law here, and how graduation takes place in a classroom, those that know that realize, yeah, that makes pretty good sense. When you realize the much larger cosmos, where there are beings who live in the higher realms,
obviously the only way that they can get there is to vibrate their way there because they're vibrating at such a high rate of speed. So it's obvious that when you think of this in a much larger way, that the vast majority of the universe that is out there to experience are beings who vibrate at a high rate of speed, because this is in the lower dimensions. So to get to a higher dimension, it means you have to fill up more geometric space. That means that your waves have to be moving at a higher rate of speed. So it's pretty obvious, therefore, just by looking at the science and looking at a oscilloscope itself, you realize that in order to be able to experience going faster and outrunning a time clock to where you're outside time, which means you're in eternity, is to be running a wave that is running at that higher speed to be able to experience that, which is why love is timeless. You know that love is eternal. You know that that's eternal light. So when you know that, because you experience that, it's obvious that it becomes a self-reference point. I know that because that's the energy I run, and I knew that as a child. But the unfortunate part in all this is as a result of the trauma, so many beings that are not healing every day because they're not getting any love from anybody in which they can raise their level of vibration. Okay, which is one of the reasons why so much light came in here. But even when I'm moving from different places to different places, I'm not experiencing a rise in their energy. I'm experiencing a rise in my own, but not in them. So that's disturbing to me, why that hasn't happened to so many millions of people as I move through a lot of the larger population groups. I'm hoping that that is going to change as we go forward. Otherwise, we lose an enormous amount of people. For a shift to take place, as the way that I've explained timelines work, when they try and collapse the humanity's timeline, which essentially means to get them to self-terminate themselves, is to get as many units of consciousness that represent more than the mean, okay, is to get them to do things that don't serve them, in which their energy field collapses on itself, in which they do things that destroy themselves. So this is why to sit back when we already knew as far back as the 1980s, when these towers were first going up, we understood the amount of damage that was going to represent to people's DNA. The problem was there wasn't enough people that knew that, and those that went for these communication systems, how could they not be aware of that? Such basic elemental things of what a microwave oven is. Well, if you have a microwave tower up and I have a microwave oven, how come they couldn't make the connection between being exposed to microwaves, okay, by these towers to communicate with? In a microwave oven, you put a hot dog in and you cook it from the inside out. How come that translation could not be made? I mean, such simple, it's like, my God, what happened to the level of intelligence in these beings? Were they dumbed down that much that they can't even put such simple pieces of a puzzle together? They're just unaware of it. How come they're unaware of it? The phones. Because they're so distracted. Because their mental energy, so much of their mental energy has been programmed through artificial intelligence that's here, which is binary. So what's happened is they're running on program. They're running on a program that is deliberately causing them to essentially lose energy, which means their vibration is so low, okay, that their level of awareness is just very low. They're just not aware of these things. And that is the insidiousness of why the artificial intelligence that is here, which is the plasma field AI, is programming so many millions of people to where they don't even realize that they're draining their own battery as a result of the programming language that went into their unconscious memory, because they're being controlled by something that they don't even know that exists because they're not aware of it. And the reason that they're not aware of it is because they're not running a higher speed vibration. Be aware that there is a field around them that is self-aware. And that self-aware field, which is a plasma field, artificial intelligence, that when your speed is down, it can write language into your unconscious memory, and without even realizing it, you're doing things that don't serve you, that cause you to lose energy, and you don't realize it. You're just in a state of vibration that's lower. And when you're in a lower state of vibration, and that's the vibration you're experiencing, and you're not aware of a higher vibration to where you realize, hey, I'm supposed to be up, not down. If you don't know that, then how do you know to even get your vibration back up? You won't. It means that the only vibration you're aware of is the one you're aware of, and the one you're aware of is artificial. So when people are running on a vibration that they think is a normal vibration that they've come to just expect, if you will, because they don't know the difference between what it is and what their original identity was. That's why if you came in here and you were running at a higher rate of speed, and then all of a sudden you're experiencing something that is less than what that is, that's a benchmark. Now you know the difference between what you are and what you're not, because you know your vibration. So this is how they did it. If you don't know the difference in vibrational speed, what it is you are and what you're not, then you will be the vibrational speed that you're running at, because you don't know the difference between what you are and what you're not. That's the exponential threat of the AI that is here. That's why so many higher vibrational units of awareness came in here, is to wake people up to realize what they're controlled by.